Hi everyone, I want to talk about fast and robust comparison dynamics in population protocols. It's a paper by me, Przemek Uznański, Dan Alistar and Martin Topfer. Both of my co-authors are from IST Austria, while I am from University of Wrocław. So the paper is about population protocols, where you have n anonymous identical agents that operate in very limited memory scenario. Basically, you can think of a constant or almost a constant number of states. Pairwise interactions, where the agents undergo some pairwise interactions and they exchange some information and change their states. Everything is governed by a random scheduler. And we essentially think of it as all of the reactions, like n reactions happening at once, but we can think of it as under a sequential scheduler, and every n interactions we say that, let's say, 1 second, one parallel time has passed. So the measures of complexity of population protocols are the number of states, so it's the memory, and time, so number of interactions divided by n. The two stable problems in this model are majority and leader election. And roughly we know after a long lines of research that both of those protocols have small, almost a constant number of states protocols that work quickly, so in logarithmic parallel time. So for population protocols, the typical solutions, the way the proofs operate is that there is some form of delicate machinery protocols that construct some complicated combinatorial solutions, but those protocols lack resilience, and so if something breaks, if we change something during the execution, everything can break, everything can explode. So those protocols usually operate under the assumption of having well-defined input and well-defined output states. If we look at how population protocols are implemented in a wet lab by, let's say, a soup of DNA strands, the typical way to implement them is through strand displacement. So we anticipate for each type of reaction, let's say A plus B goes into C plus D. We anticipate and we prepare some form of DNA complexes. So we call them blobs, where a blob will essentially accept A and then accept the B and then release C and D. And well, a huge amount of effort has been put into efficient implementations in DNA of population protocols and of chemical reaction networks. But one side effect of this is that well, the wet lab implementation can be very faulty and can be very error prone, but also it can result in, let's say, species being spontaneously released by blobs. We proposed a model that tries to capture this behavior. So we call this type of errors leaks. And this is a stochastic error that occurs with some small fixed probability. And if this fault happens, adversary can, instead of actually going to A plus B goes into C plus D, it can produce some other output where the output is any other species that can be produced by any type of reaction. So if only S increases its count by any reaction in the grammar defining the population protocol, it can also be spontaneously produced. So let's take a look at the easiest problem that becomes hard by introduction of leaks. So the problem is the detection problem. Is some species X present on the input? The classical solution for this would be, well, everyone is in neutral state. X is a source of a rumor. If X meets N, then both go into X. This is a classical rumor spreading. After log n time, everyone, if x was present on the input, everyone will have x, state x. Major issue here is that any false positive reaction here will contaminate the population that had no x's, and quickly the false rumor will spread. A better approach would be to make x into catalytic state. So x is never produced. X just whenever x meets a neutral state, well, x will remain x, and the neutral state will be some form of detection state. D means I have met the source of the rumor, and then D propagates. Well, we just pushed our problem one step further because this is still an issue. The adversary can simulate existence of X because X has to make some. I mean, we think about any possible protocol. X has to make some change in the input. So X has to produce something through reaction, even if X is catalytic. So X itself cannot be produced by the adversary. So adversary can simulate a weak existence of like X in the input, even if X is not in the input, because X will produce something through its in interactions. So we need to adapt our thinking of the protocols a little bit. Because there are two types of faults. I mean, we have false positives where adversary can simulate existence of X, and we have false negatives where adversary can try to us to prevent X from reacting. And any protocol that deals with those types of faults, well, it has to be essentially self-stabilizing because there will be false positives. We just have to recover from them. So our way of changing the way of thinking of the problem is we have this soup of constantly reacting particles, and we either add source of the rumor or we remove it, and we expect the protocol to adapt to it over time. In previous work in this area, so in DNA 2017, that means Dan Alistarch and me and 3 other authors, we proposed the leak model, and we proposed the rumor spreading solution, so rumor spreading with distance protocol, and we provided some rudimentary analysis. Our contribution in this paper is very precise concentration guarantees for the rumor spreading, and then proposing a new problem, so the comparison problem, X versus Y, and also analyzing protocols for that problem, and various space-time precision trade-offs for those problems. So let's look at the protocol in more details. Essentially, what we want the agents to count the number of interactions from the source of the rumor. So when X meets someone, they become X1. When X1 meets someone, they become X2, and so on and so forth. But we need the protocol to be also to recover from false positives. So even if I am with a counter, let's say Xi, and I interact with someone, my inner counter also increases. So you have this cascade of X1 becoming 2 X2s, which become 4 X3s, 8 X4s, and so on. So on the left, we have those rules of interaction, but essentially those can be simplified if we just think of the protocol being interpreted as having infinite number of states with counters from x1 up to x infinity, but two large values of a counter we just interpret as neutral states. So then the rules of interaction are simple. If xi mates with xj, for I smaller or equal than j, they both become xi plus 1. If x met someone, they x is catalytic, it stays x, and xi becomes x1. And the expected value analysis, by expected value analysis, I mean we just think of the number of x's as this state of a protocol, and we can look at what is the expected change of the counts under randomly pick interaction, and we just look for such a state that the gradient is 0, the expected change is 0. And solving this for the steady state, we get this solution that is that we expect the protocol to concentrate around, where roughly the size of the levels doubles until we run out of space. That is when the levels really start to have those inner collisions. And then you get this double exponential decay after. And in the paper, we actually provide the concentration guarantees around those expected values for the size of the levels. So the tool that we are using is essentially, we call it a Trackinglemma. We have one stochastic process that is weakly concentrated around some value. And we have another stochastic process that slowly averages towards the first stochastic process, and it also will concentrate eventually around the same value. And then we use it by induction for the size of the levels. And we can show inductively that, well, if ith level concentrates, then after log n time, the I plus 1 level will concentrate because there are log n levels, everything concentrates in log squared n time. And then we actually improve this also in the paper to truly log n time by the technique we call bootstrapping, where we show that because the protocol is quickly mixing, if it converges in any time, it converges quickly. Then we do the same analysis for a more involved problem. We call this problem we call this problem comparison problem, and we provide a very robust solution for this. So the problem is that instead of detecting whether there is a small number of particles X present in the input, we have two types of particles, X and Y's, and we want to compare the counts of those and decide which one was smaller, which one was larger. And essentially, the solution we propose is inspired by the robust detection solution. And here we just say that still the agents have the counts, which is the source, the distance from the source of the rumor, but they also remember the opinion, X or Y, for the guy that gave them the rumor. So they know the distance from the rumor and the type of the opinion they got. And it can be shown that essentially the proportion on each level of opinion X versus Y is roughly preserved. So whatever ratio was on the very first level on the source of the rumor is preserved across all of the levels. So the whole population will be divided roughly with the same ratio. And this will happen after log n time, and we propose some Chernow type bounds, concentration bounds for this phenomenon to happen. And then we can employ a technique called amplification, where imagine we are in this scenario where, let's say, 2/3 of the population votes X and 1/3 of the population votes Y. I mean, this is good, but not as good as we would like it to be. So the solution that we propose is that each agent keeps a small counter, and this counter goes up or down depending on what was the opinion of the last guy they interacted with. And essentially, log n states are enough for this counter to obtain a significant precision boost. And then the next thing that we analyze in the paper is memory time trade-offs, where you can get a better memory complexity of the protocols by considering the protocols that produce wider but shallower tree. And how do we obtain wider and shallower tree? Where whenever xi infects orders to become xi plus 1, it doesn't immediately go into the lower level. It goes there only with some small probability. So then the expected out degree will be not 2, but let's say 1 over p. Then the expected height will decrease, but the time increases. Essentially what we show, for example, you can go down up to log n levels, so the space complexity will be log n, not log n, but the time will grow to something sub-polynomial, but super logarithmic. And then also in the paper, we analyze everything that we just mentioned, but from the perspective of leak robustness. It's essentially more math, but the same phenomenon of amplification of the signal happens. Thank you.